All right, Bill. Well, thanks for joining me today. And we're going to be putting together a little video montage for our offsite of people's experiences about how the company was and the things we've changed over the years. So I thought you'd be a great interview for me. So thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. That's 37 years coming up this month. So to put that in context, this year I had my 35th wedding anniversary.
Yeah, so you're in for the long haul in a bunch of places, brother.
Yeah.
So maybe take me back. Like, how did you start with Walters and Wolf?
Well, out of high school, I had a couple of jobs doing production work type of stuff. One at a plastic factory, one at a company that built the Atari video game cabinets. And I could see that those weren't long-term career choices. So I was just looking in the newspaper and I saw that there was plumbers apprenticeships. So I called them and they weren't testing at that time to join the plumbers union. So my dad had worked at Walters and Wolf for a couple of years, right when Randy bought them out from Hart Glass. He had worked at Hart Glass after he had worked at Universal and then converted that to Walters and Wolf. And so I asked my dad about production work because I saw an ad in the newspaper then about Walters and Wolf was hiring production workers. And he was somewhat reluctant. He wanted me to get my own sense of what I wanted to do in my career. He didn't want me to just become a glazer because he was a glazer. But I told him it was something I was interested in. I'd always loved doing hands-on stuff. I liked the precision nature of doing quality work. And so he got me an interview with Ron Nickerson Sr., went down there, and 2 weeks later, after I gave notice some other place, I took a little pay cut. It went from $7 an hour to $6 an hour when I started in the shop back in 1984. So worked there, basically started in the shop, worked in that facility for 84 till about 86, about two and a half years until they built the building on the corner of Boswell there.
So I just want to make a note for anybody watching this that's, in the younger generation, an ad in the newspaper, you'll have to look that up because you may not know what that means. So
yes.
When you started out in the shop, obviously, learning that part of things. And when I met you, you were, one of the main guys out on the shop floor. Like, how did that career trajectory happen for you? What kind of things did you do over that career?
Yeah, so I started just doing regular production work, running the saws, using tape measures to measure all the parts. We had one of the saws at that time had an electronic kind of stop. And so I didn't know any better. I would trust that. And I'd be cutting these face stops and my team leader would come over. He'd be checking my parts and measuring and go, "Your parts are off by like 1/8 of an inch." I'm like, "How can that be? I put the dimension I wanted right on the chart, but I hadn't gone back and checked them." So I learned a good lesson pretty early on to just make sure that everything I was doing, followed through and had that check process on it. So worked in production for a while, and then I went over and joined D. Betancourt in the door shop. And I spent several years building doors. And it was a lot of fun because it really demanded that high level of precision to be able to get a door so that it fit. All the hardware had to be perfect. It had to be strong for the long term. And so I really enjoyed working in the door shop. At that time, we did everything manually. We had big steel fixtures that we bolted onto this giant steel rack. And we had these hand routers and we'd pour tons of oil on there. And we'd be pushing these routers and routing out these cutouts for the hardware, the pivots and the locks and all of that. And then we did everything manually. So we had drill presses that we used for drilling out all of the mullions for the corner blocks. We had a big bolt that went in there, but all of our processes were very manual. But D had a system where he was able to process a door in a very predictable time frame, right? He got his parts and pieces in. He knew what it take to build the door. So it was very reliable to be able to say how many doors are going to be able to get done in a certain amount of time. After working in the door shop for a while, you know, the needs of the shop change as jobs change. So I went back to production, and after a while I became a team leader. And at first I wasn't quite sure what I needed to do as a team leader, but basically it was making sure that the guys working with me were checking their work, counting their parts, packaging them correctly, making sure there was no damage on the pieces when we sent them out to the field. And that progressed for a while. Eventually I became an allied worker as I was progressing through my career. And, you know, I loved working in a shop. I worked in there for many years. And I got to a point where I realized that even as an allied worker, I wasn't able to maintain like a high quality of living wage. And so at that point, I started investigating the apprenticeship program. So with the blessing of the shop foreman at the time, I joined the apprenticeship program. Al was my teacher. Getting his last name right now, he'll kill me. Anyway, he was my teacher. And then as I went through the apprenticeship program, because I had so much background in the shop for so many years, I had a great understanding of what the nature of the glazing industry was. And to that end, as soon as I turned out to journeyman, I became an apprenticeship instructor myself. So I actually taught first year apprentices. At that time, we were going to school one night a week and then one Saturday a month. Little tiny shop off on Tea Garden in San Leandro. So eventually we needed to expand a little bit. We had a second little shop for teaching next door. And at one point I was teaching 2 classes. So I would come in 2 nights a week and 2 Saturdays a month. And I was teaching first year and third year. And then I did that for about 4 or 5 years until we started expecting our first child. So Millie was born in 2003. And that's when I had to give up the teaching because I didn't have capacity to do both. And somewhat around that same time, they started shifting gears to where the teaching process would go to, the apprentice would come in for a 1-week time frame. But during all of that, I always focused on all of the safety aspects of the training. That was really the focus, making sure that anything that we were teaching to any of the apprentices coming through the program had that strong safety background as the base. Because if you don't go home from work safe at the end of every single day, then you failed at your project, right? So after I had kind of gone through that level, I was still working in the shop because of the need. They needed me in the shop. And at that time I was running the shop B, which we were doing unitized at that point. So we eventually got to a bit of a slowdown in the shop. And so I went and transferred out to the field. And the field life is way different than being in the shop environment. I was used to having a broom and I knew right where it was. I knew what I had to do at the end of each day. Getting out in the field where your work environment changes minute to minute, really, because you're installing all the product. Well, so is every other trade around you. And so we would get into situations where we'd be installing parts and pieces, and then we'd get a call, hey, we got to go move all of our stacks of glass because the sheetrocker needs to get into that room right now. And so we didn't have, you know, strict processes on where everything was going to be staged and handled. And so a lot of it was really on the fly negotiations of where you're going to be doing your work at any given time. So it was very chaotic compared to what I was used to working in the shop. But I did that for several years and I was fine with it. A lot harder on the body when I was kneeling down and caulking sill tracks, for example. You know, at the end of those days, I was like, oh, this is painful. But I worked my way through it. Well, after a while, Roger Ryan came out to me and he said, there's an opening in the office where they need somebody to be a checker. And I'm like, okay. Well, I don't know exactly what a checker would do, but I went in, I talked to Dave Morales. He was working as the Jumpstart manager at that time, but realistically it was Pete running the department. And so I interviewed with Pete for the project. And so he decided, well, let's give it a try and see if it's a good fit for you. So I tried it. And at that time, Millie was just a baby. She was about 10 months old when I started. Well, she's 18 years old now. And I've been working in the office in engineering ever since. So it's been a great trajectory to be able to, you know, get the base of, you know, the mechanics of how do all the machines operate? How do all the parts work? Why are we putting holes in these pieces? And then getting out to the field and really getting that understanding of, you know, at that time we were doing mostly stick stuff, but it's like, how do you set a piece of glass in the opening? How do you get that vinyl in there so that it holds it in place and it won't leak in the future? So a lot of those things, you know, coming together really gave me an outstanding background to be able to understand the engineering side of it. Even before that in the shop, I was doing a lot of the same things that a project coordinator, a checker, would do when I was running the shop. I would get the set of shop drawings, and at that point there was those big, like 24 by 36s. It would take up the whole plan table, but I would take those, take the work orders, and I would bring in the team leads that were going to be working on that project, and we would go through and we would check the sizes of the parts. This is your key sheet. These are where these parts are going to go. This is how you calculate the size to know that that part is going to work for that spot. And so we would do checking together before we even started on the work order, rather than just, here's the work order, I hope it's right. You know, we took ownership to make sure that whatever we were producing was going to be able to be installed. Because if it got past the shop and it was in the field and somebody's trying to install something, but they're 1.5 inches too short, that creates a lot of problems. And we knew that. So we tried to do a lot of that checking type work on the fly. And there were definitely times when we were doing those processes and we found something's a little weird here. And so we would call over to engineering, and Pete or Jose or Mario would come out. They'd make sure of what we were doing, and they like, oh yeah, that you caught a little mistake right there. We better fix it. And so we would just mark it on the fab ticket itself, and we'd make it the right size. I don't think we'd bother changing the mark number or anything unless it was a different size. But, you know, we didn't have the kind of the method that we do now, where if you had a change, you need to make sure that the key sheet gets updated so that everything's current. Because if you're looking for the part and it's not right in the field, you're just wasting time. Yep. You know, even when we were running big projects in the shop that were like stick systems, like those early Britannia buildings, and there's thousands and thousands of parts. Well, the shop, we didn't know exactly what was going out to the field. We'd get these cut lists. We'd cut all the parts and throw them on a pallet. And then we heard so many reports that the guys in the field were spending days and days and days digging through these pallets and throwing things everywhere. And as soon as you do that, you don't even know what pallet they came from anyway. So, you know, it's been pretty amazing to see the advances we've made based on all of the feedback that we get. You know, we've never been shy to ask for what could have gone better for you. You know, so a lot of those things have led to the improvements we've made and really where we are today.
Yeah, no, and I think the thing, I don't know if everybody knows, but we didn't have checkers. That wasn't a position. That was something that I brought into Pete and told him, look, there should be people doing the work and there should be people checking the work, because unless it's right, we should never have done it, right? So there were no checkers in this company. Like when people did the work, maybe their PM would back check them, but again, like, you know how that goes. So
Yep.
we had a lot of dudes running out to the shop, usually with a stapler in their back pocket and a pair of those little things to take the staples out, and then
Yep.
some white out and a pin so they could fix the fab tickets because they found something. You know, because usually
Exactly.
you release it and then check it, by the way. So yeah, that's
Yes.
well, perfect. Thank you, Bill. I appreciate you taking the time to give us a little bit of the background of where you came from and how things were in this company as you came up. And there's some parallels, I think, with some of the stuff Chris said and Bobby said, and the timing there, which is really interesting too. So
Yeah.
thank
And
you.
just one additional thing is, we did so many stick systems during the early parts of my career, but I was there when we started doing unitized, and we did very basic unitized systems. And even the unitized systems, they started to progress over time. We had basically just like these C-shaped verticals that would nest together, but 1/4 inch glass, and then we just set the glass on, caulk them with our 983 gun. Even at that time, we couldn't leave the gun set because they weren't a mix in the chamber. They were mixed way back in the line. And so if you let it set, it would harden up, and then the maintenance department would have to spend 2 or 3 days trying to clean a gun for you. So we didn't take regular lunch breaks at that point. We would have shifts so that the guy running the pump would just keep running the pump. When he went to lunch, somebody else would take it over, right? So,
Yeah.
but even then we did all of the stuff manually. We did a lot of the initial stuff in shop A, in one of the little bays. We would set up tables with arms that were adjustable, lay the mullions on the tables and kind of square them up corner to corner, set the glass all by hand. We'd take the 1/4 inch glass and just lay it over 2 guys. When we started introducing some exotic things into our units, we started getting stone on our units. And so we'd have these clips. We'd set the stone on the unit. We'd have these little brackets to set the height. We'd use shims to wedge it to that height on the bracket. We'd climb under the table, drill a hole, and then bolt it off with an actual bolt. Well, we were setting those stones by hand for the most part too. We would just take 2 guys, lift the stones up, drop them on, and we'd have some shims there so we could get our hands out. And then we thought it was a big advancement when we had the area where the overhead crane was. We made these steel C channels on these chains, and we used that to lift the stones. And we used that, a good part of the time. But realistically, if the guys were fit and strong enough to be able to lift them, it was actually faster to lift them. And now, we've gone into so much bigger and heavier materials that we do so many things so much safer now that, it's not that we were not safe. I mean, I already emphasized that we were, focused on safety. It's just that if you think about a guy lifting 30 pieces of stone from the ground onto the top of a unit every day, that can get old in a hurry. It wears your body down. So much better to be able to use the mechanical devices to assist in those things.
No, I appreciate it, brother. And this will be a great video for everybody to kind of watch. So I'm going to stop right here.